important.
So today, as we look at Juneteenth, I think it's important, there are a lot of celebrations around the country, and it has just been made into a national holiday. President Biden voted it in, President Biden turned it into a national holiday, I think it was like 2 or 3 days ago. But what we really need to look at is, so what's next? How does the system affect individuals, families, and communities? And then looking at how do we heal? How do we heal? So what needs to happen now? So let's talk about, first of all, let's talk about the video, what you heard, what you saw, how it affected you, what you felt as you were watching it. Because remember, this work is really about staying in your body, taking a nice deep breath and staying present as you watch these things and as you learn it. It's it can be difficult history. So let's talk about it. What did you feel? What did you sense? What did you hear? What did you experience as you watched that video?
Sadness, disappointment, disbelief. I was glad to see the people who see what happened and are speaking about it in an articulate way, in a straight line, so we cannot miss it. Who is giving these people a microphone? Where are they having influence? Are they having any? That's what it is for me.
Thank you, Melon. Who else? Feelings, emotions. Cynthia Harvey.
Hi. It seems to me from that video, especially, that the Black speakers who have been activists and the rest of us, or not maybe us in this room, have different points of view, actually, as to statistics based on what I've just heard there.
Yeah, and it depends on who's done the research and what they're looking at specifically. You'll find that the research, it sort of wobbles, right? Like you see some numbers here and some numbers there. But the bottom line is I think sometimes we pay a lot of attention to the specific numbers. I think even more important than that is the percentage. It's the larger percentages of, as opposed to this, because you'll find that even though the research itself varies, ultimately the percentages don't. They're still pretty much the same. They're pretty close. So yeah. Okay, who else? Questions, comments? What did you feel? Because remember, part of this is just staying present and staying in your body. So nice deep breath and blow it out. What are you feeling in your body? Where are you feeling it? What's happening with you? Willie. I know you're on your phone, Willie, but I see your hand and we'd love to hear from you. You'll have to get off mute, Willie. Willie's iPhone.
I'm unmuted now. Sorry.
Okay, great. That's okay.
For me, it brought a lot of emotions up, dealing with, a lot of things that's been said for, decades, and just people just ignoring it as if it never happened, and I'm 49 years old. So you can imagine majority of my life, I lived through it and watched family members go through all those different situations, and just trying to get people to recognize that, hey, this is a problem over here and we don't even know how to deal with it. So it brings a little bit of joy to me, knowing that now that people are able to hear our stories instead of just assuming that this is what it is, they're able to actually hear it and have some facts to back them up.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, again, and I say this over and over and over again, it's like we can't heal without our history. We need that information to make the transformation. We need to understand what has happened before that created where we are today. And then we can think creatively about tomorrow. Lori.
Yeah, left with a really palpable, weighty sense of sadness around particularly the piece that talked about how when people go into jail, they are forgotten, and this sense of, I have experienced that through a friend who was inside, and just that sense of being erased. And the idea that that volume, that quantity of people are being erased is unconscionable and really sits heavy.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, you know, and think about, you know, I want us to go back for a minute. I want you to continue to feel and breathe and just, you know, be present in your body with what's happening in your body right now. But here's something that I think it's important. One of those things is, you know, the numbers of people who were just after the Civil War, let's just go back there. The numbers of people who were rounded up and thrown into jail, because you remember, the nation's economy was based on free labor, right? And so the moment somebody says all of the laborers are now set free and they can go off and get work where they actually are going to get paid for their labor, that collapses the economy, right? And we can't have that. So what you do is you round up people and you put them in jail. And literally they did that. They rounded up Black men and they put them in jail. And that's when they started the leasing program. But here's the interesting thing. If you take a man and you put him in jail and he already has a family, that means that now that family has been left without an income, because remember, back then, women weren't really allowed to work unless they were domestic, and Black women could only pretty much be domestic unless they were seamstresses or something like that, where they could do, you know, or take people's laundry and bring it to their home. But for the most part, people did domestic work. So you take the male out of the household. So now the woman is left to raise her family by herself. And she's limited in the work that she can get and what she can do, because there are only but so many families that are hiring domestics, right? So some people get work and some people don't. And it also leaves that woman not just to take care of the family that's there, but also parents and grandparents if those were still in the household. Then you also have the effect of this on the next generation, because now you have the children who, again, are now have been left without the person who might have been the breadwinner, might or might not, because remember, they might or might not have gotten a job because they were still melanin people, right? And so, you know, so you have this whole generation, not to mention the trauma to that family. And those of you who have been doing this work with me for a long time know that trauma gets passed on for, you know, at least a good 6 generations, right? So you traumatize the first generation, and every subsequent generation, up to 6 generations at least after, are also traumatized. So now you have that trauma, and no one is talking about, thinking about, or dealing with the other side of this, right? Which is, so you have this person who's in jail, and a lot of the times these people were innocent, you know, and we're still doing that, by the way. That's not something that happened yesterday. It doesn't happen anymore. Innocent people are rounded up and put to jail because they need a free labor force. So they needed that free labor force. So they put these men in jail and they had them, you know, build railroads and, you know, like do all kinds of work. And the insidious part of it is that they're still serving, they're still doing work, but they're not getting paid. And so there's no money going back to that family regardless. And the state is not necessarily, especially back then, taking care of that family. So what we do is we abandon these people to their own fate. when, let's say, somebody was put in jail because they committed a crime and they were guilty, the whole family is treated as if they were guilty, because now everybody's suffering from what has just happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we don't take care of their mental health. We don't take care of, and it's still happening. And then you have children who go to school who have just either witnessed something horrific or they've had a family member taken away or whatever happened, right? And so now the children are going to school and they're traumatized. And people say they can't learn. But nobody's dealing with that child's trauma. In fact, they're not even asking what's wrong. So this stuff is huge, and we don't always, we're very victim driven, as well we should be. It's horrific what happens. Somebody loses a family member, whatever it's horrible. It's horrible. And we also need to remember that we live in a culture that creates thieves and murderers and then wants to punish people for becoming thieves and murderers. We need to think about that, because what we do is we throw people away, right? Without considering the effect of their mental health and the mental health of their family and what just happened to all of those people, because it isn't just that one person, it's all of those people. So you have somebody who, let's say, commits a crime. Now the whole family has been affected. And I find it amazing that we rarely, even if we're going to look at it even from the spiritual perspective, we rarely even offer prayer for those people's families. Does that make sense what I'm saying? We just, it's as if they don't exist. They weren't the ones that committed the crime. They just lost a family member. So they're grieving and they're traumatized. And we don't always consider how we are collectively one human family. What affects one of us affects us all, which is why Dr. King said injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, everywhere. So we have to just start opening our hearts and minds and thinking broader about these subjects and about these topics so that we can begin to think collectively, creatively. How do we create a society that truly takes care of all the members of the family? Lynn, you have your hand up. Welcome. You're muted.
Sorry, I was late to the meeting, but I did see a piece of the video. And what I'm struck with, and it's been true with the prior session I attended that you gave a couple of Saturdays ago, I have a overwhelming sense of guilt when I hear these stories and when I see these videos as a white woman. And it's not as though, as a Jewish woman, I don't have my own history. The reason I am an American is my grandfather escaped the pogrom when he was 13 years old and made it to this country. But that doesn't help me. I have this overwhelming sense of collective guilt about what white people did in this country. And maybe it's why I do this work. I don't know. But it's just something that comes back in a very emotional way when I see these videos, when I hear people talk.
Thank you. Yeah, it's, the thing to keep in mind as we start healing and transforming and looking at ourselves is that all of our histories are tied together. They just are. We don't live, we live on one planet, one earth, and all of our histories are tied together. And the history of oppression is a huge history. And when you understand the history of oppression, like I always remind people when we go back and we do the history of Europe and we look at that, especially when I do the race literacy programs, that, excuse me, those people were traumatized, and they perpetrated the trauma on the rest of the world. And there were things that were institutionalized, and they were institutionalized in a very specific way to be able to traumatize large groups of people, because when people are traumatized, they are destabilized, and people who are destabilized are easier to control. So historically, that is what we've done with groups of humans, is traumatize, to destabilize, to control. And when we see these things happening to other groups of people, as we call them, right? The stuff that's already embedded in us comes up. The grief, the fear, the anger, the frustration, the feeling abandoned, all of those feelings come up. That's why I have you feel the feelings and stay present in your body, because that's the stuff that we're carrying, that stuff. We are all carrying that stuff. So just being aware of that can be helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Who else? Feelings, emotions. How did you feel? And yeah, hi, Jen.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, Milagros. Willie had his hand up. I don't know if he still has a question. He had his
Oh,
hand
I'm
up.
so sorry. Willie, where are you? There you are. You
Oh, I
still
guess
have
he's
your
saying
question?
no. He's fine.
Oh, okay. I thought yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So Jen, and then at.
Yeah. Hi,
Christina.
everyone. Thank you for this, Milagros. For me, I think it's the multiple emotions at once. It's like the hopelessness. There's a feeling of hopelessness and powerlessness, knowing that the continuation of the oppression just keeps getting transferred over the decades and centuries in different ways. And then also the hopefulness that people are talking about this and there's more awareness of it. I feel like it feels so appropriate to be talking about the prison system today. And there's that part of me, it's like frustrated, I guess, knowing that there are these Juneteenth celebrations across the country, which is really wonderful on one hand, because it's an acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And at the same time, are they talking about the prison system is the thing we should be talking about on Juneteenth at the same time? It's like that connection, and how do we see past that and work past that and change that system so there can be real freedom? So that's kind of that draw of like hopeful and hopeless at the same time, that I feel like my body is feeling the contrast, and really wanting to see real changes and people waking up. And I see the potential for that. I feel that kind of potential, and the advancements that are happening. And at the same time, it's like the depth and the weight of the history. So I think that, I guess, is part of that grieving process that you're talking about as well, so that the waking up can happen.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of it. I mean, we have to understand that grief is an important part of the healing process, especially when it comes to this stuff. And for some people who have sort of, been asleep, and that was sort of their realm, right? And who never sort of didn't really believe that some of the things that were happening that Black people have been talking about for centuries is sort of like, oh, they're just complainers kind of a thing. A lot of people suddenly woke up and realized, oh, this is real, and so there's a lot of loss of innocence around that stuff, and a pulling out of ignorance. And the difference between those two is that in innocence, there's a kind of not knowing, like young children tend to be innocent around some of this stuff, and young people. And ignorance is, what are you ignoring, right? Because ignorance is about ignoring something. So, it's important to kind of discern the differences. Kristen.
Hi. Yes, I saw the video, and I had owned a company in Miami, and I started it with 3 employees, and one was a man from Haiti. There's a big Haitian population in Miami, and we would go around in the truck. There were only 3 of us, and he and I would sell the product together as he was driving the truck. And he was an integral part of the business. And then one Monday, he just wasn't there. And he'd been arrested and he was incarcerated. And my business partner and I tried to defend him. I mean, we paid quite a bit of money to have him, a lawyer, appear on his behalf in court. And we heard, oh, the judge didn't even listen. Just our lawyer fed back to us that the judge hadn't listened, and the man was arrested and he's been in jail. His sentence is 20 years. He served 10 years of that. And we went to try to visit him and we had to wait 5 hours. They just made it so difficult to even see him. And so when I watched this video, quite honestly, I put this out of my mind. I feel guilty because I put it, John has a son who's my son's age, who's now grown up. And, you know, after trying to visit him and having it so difficult and trying to support him in the legal system and having it so difficult, I feel guilty. I mean, that was it. I've written a letter to him. He's written to me, but it's a personal story too. I met a man that helped me start a business and has been in jail for 10 years. And I don't even know if it was right or wrong, the sentence, but I know it was a huge loss to my life and certainly to his family. What you said about his family is true. He was the coach of the boy in soccer and suddenly he's gone. So that's how I'm feeling about it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Yeah. Very, so just breathe, everybody, and just feel that it's a huge loss to the society. You saw the numbers when we watched the video. I mean, those are huge numbers of human beings, and how we have more people incarcerated in this country than in other jails around the world. So pretty deep. Other comments and feelings. And I know that, so let me say this. So it took 2 years from 1863, the original Emancipation Proclamation, to 2 years later was they put together the 13th Amendment. And here's the thing about that. You have to remember that there was no TV. A lot of people couldn't read and write. So even if it was in the newspaper, they may or may not have seen it or been able to read it or had someone read it to them. So there were a lot of people who, even after the enslaved were set free, remained enslaved. In some places, up to 12 years, because nobody was telling them that the enslaved had been set free. And so, and so when you stop and you think about that, and you think about free labor from the perspective of finances, and even just those 12 years where people, were not, they continued to labor for free. And so, like, this stuff is huge, and it's important to understand that it's not as simple as people want to make it seem, that there are layers and layers to this stuff, layers and layers to it. So comments, questions, anything else about that video, where you felt it in your body, how it felt, what came up for you as you watched it, or even as you hear the stories that are being shared. What is coming up for you? Yeah, Melon.
I want to know how we can hold the powers that be accountable and why it hasn't been done. I mean, it's the next step. And I haven't heard what has really been done. I remember when the Democratic campaign was going on for president last time, Marianne Williamson was talking boldly and clearly about reparations. And I think she was the only one. And I just wanted whoever the president was to say, you are on my team. Go find an African-American person to be on this team together, because you got to either have a Black person running it or two of you have to be running it, and get this done. You know, it's good to have a white ally, and a Black person's got to do it. So Kamala, come on. Get this done. Well,
so here's the thing, Melon. This country is under sovereign law. And a lot of people don't realize that, which means that we are ruled by the sovereigns. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. We are under the Doctrine of Discovery. The Doctrine of Discovery is a sovereign document that was put together in the 1400s, and we're still under that document. Okay, that document was about taking, and for those of you, look, I don't want to repeat myself too much. So who does not know about the Doctrine of Discovery? Does everyone here know about the Doctrine of Discovery? And if you do not, can you just let me know? Because otherwise, you know, I don't need to explain it. So does anyone not know?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe I'm the only one, so you can make it
Yeah.
very brief.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I don't know if anyone, I only have access to one screen. So let me just go check the second screen and see if anyone there. Okay, so everybody knows about the Doctrine of Discovery. We just have one person. Okay, so
can you speak more on it? Because I mean, I've researched, but you know, I researched so much stuff. I tend to forget certain things.
okay,
This is Dots. I don't know. I couldn't
Okay.
get into the chat.
okay. So there's several of you who don't know. Okay, great. All right. So in 1432, if we look back, the papacy and the monarchy were always at odds with each other, trying to figure out who actually ruled and who was given the right, who had the God-given right to rule the nation, right? So the monarchy and the papacy in Europe, they were always at odds with one another. And they were also trying to find ways that they could actually work together. So in 1432, the papacy declared that the prince at the time, who was named Henry the Navigator, would have the right to go and sail into Africa. And let me back up. So they created this document called the Doctrine of Discovery. The Doctrine of Discovery basically says that this particular European nation, which is Portugal, could sail into, take over the lands, enslave the people for perpetuity, and take their possessions, and anything that belonged to the people belonged to whoever the quote unquote discoverer were. For in that particular time, it was Henry the Navigator who was given the right to do that. He actually himself wasn't a sailor, but you know, they gave him the right to, they gave Portugal, the church gave Portugal the right to go in and enslave and take over the lands and take over the people, which is how they started colonizing. Africa in the 1400s. Okay, so this particular document was then ratified several times by the papacy, and the last time that it was changed was in 1493, which was, remember, Columbus sailed to the Dominican, what is now the Dominican Republic. It was La Quisqueya was the original name, and then it was named La Española, and now it's called the Dominican Republic. And he sailed there looking for India. When he landed, he claimed that land for Spain, which is how it got to be called La Española. But the reason that he was able to do that was because the papacy had declared that any land where people lived that were not Catholic, okay, they stretched it to Christian, but originally it was Catholic, that they were not deemed human. And so therefore it was called terra nulla, which meant that, no one was occupying the land, even though there were human beings there. Because they were not Catholic, they were not considered human. And so therefore it was as if they didn't exist. And so the Europeans can come and colonize. So after Columbus went back in 1493, and he went back with gold, silver, food, and human cargo, which were the Taínos. He took, they claim he took about 100 Taínos with him. Not all of them made the voyage. Some of them died at sea. But we went back to Spain and they saw all the stuff that he brought back. They were like, ooh, there's gold in them, their hills, right? And so they started, and remember that the monarchy, they were all related, right? And so very quickly the word spread, and then everybody started colonizing those islands, and subsequently and eventually they colonized the continental USA. So this document, the Doctrine of Discovery, is a really important document because it has continued to be used since the 1400s. The last time that it was used, and when I say used, I'm talking about used in all the colonized nations, such as Australia, Canada, Central South America, obviously North America, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. And so all of these places that were colonized are under the Doctrine of Discovery, and they still are. The last time that the Doctrine of Discovery was used in the United States was in 2005. And it was Justice Ginsburg who used it to keep the to win a case against the Oneida Nation in New York. And it was a land case. They used the Doctrine of Discovery a lot in land cases. I think 2015 was the last time that Canada used it. And, so it's still around from the 1400s. Okay. And a lot of people don't know that. So the reason I'm mentioning that, Melon, is because we are a nation of laws, right? Laws don't equate to justice. I'm always reminding people of that. But we're a nation of laws. That doctrine basically said that any of the colonizing European nations had the right to enslave and own the people and their possessions, as well as whatever's possessed in the land, for perpetuity, and that it was the right to their descendants, successors, and heirs. And as a result, that law still exists and is international law. That's why Canada can use it, and Australia can use it, and all these places use it. I mean, they mostly use it for land. But when you really stop to think about it, the law had a lot to do with human life and the enslavement of human beings. And so, you have to understand that piece to understand how and why no one's done anything. And most people don't even know about that, about that we are under the Doctrine of Discovery still today. And so there are native nations that have been working to try to get the Vatican to get rid of this thing.
Right.
Okay. And they've not been able to make inroads. But it's important to understand that because without an understanding of that piece of not just history, but current story, right? Like it's not back then, it's also here and now. We don't understand why things aren't changing the way that we would like for them to change, and who actually needs to make the changes. And if you have something that's been written into law, that's never been rescinded, it can be used at any given point in time by any lawyer, which is why Justice Ginsburg was able to use it, even though it came from the 1400s.
So then that's the next question. Then is it not true that we need to pressure the Pope to unhook this Doctrine of Discovery?
Yeah, So that's why I'm always talking about it, because I'm always telling people about it, because nobody knows about it. I did a presentation for a group of lawyers. There were 120 lawyers in the room, and 10 of them claimed to have heard of it. And to be honest with you, I don't know, it was a little iffy, to be honest with you. I really think it was the original 3 people who said, because they work with natives. And so if you work with natives, you have to kind of know that law. But very few people. So you figure if people who are in the law industry, right, don't know about it, can you imagine the rest of the humans on the planet? Like, people don't know. And again, that's why I'm constantly saying that we need to become race literate, because we don't know what we don't know. And we're trying to change something without understanding it. You need to understand something if you're going to change it, because otherwise, if you think that the problem is over here and you're working over here to try to change the problem, but really the root of the problem is over here, right? Then you're almost working in vain, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to where the problem actually is. What is it? One of my favorite quotes from Henry David Thoreau is, for every 1,000 people hacking at the branches of evil, there's only one beating at the root. That it is that whole thing of, if we don't understand the history, it's very difficult for us to shift things and to ask for what it is that we need, and to ask for what it is that we want, and to be able to bring up good, healthy solutions that are that are innovative and that can make a difference, and to also join causes or join groups that are doing things to change some of these laws and some of these things that have been put in place, because they're hurting human beings every day on a daily basis. The other thing to remember is that those countries that were colonized, somebody brought up Haiti earlier, okay? Please remember that those countries were colonized because they had so much wealth, and a lot of them still do. The people in those countries don't get to see the wealth, because the wealth gets siphoned and taken out of there, right? But those countries are incredibly wealthy. I'm always telling people, I think it's like maybe 5-6 years ago or something, they found a new vein of gold in the Dominican Republic, and then they had to negotiate with the Canadians who wanted to take it out of there, right? And so, it's understanding that, and Haiti has been paying reparations since 1825. They liberated themselves in 1804, and they were paying reparations to France since 1825. So, again, and then we call Haiti the poorest country in the world. Well, you can't afford to pay reparations if you're that poor, right? Like, you're so poor you can't pay attention, right? That's not who they are. That's what, there's wealth in that land. They just don't get access to that wealth, the people in the country, because they're under, the Doctrine of Discovery. And the people don't even know it.
Milagros,
Yes.
I have a question about Haiti, because again, I think 10% of Miami, or it's a very large population in Miami, is from Haiti. And Haitians are very proud that Haiti was a democracy before the United States was.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked that up. That's true. It was a democracy. And I've just always been confused by what happened. Why is it the poorest country in the world, where it had, and I think it was a Black man that made it a democracy? Do you know more about the history of that and how it missed its chance to really, it seems like it, at least the history that we've seen so far.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like Haiti missed its chance. Haiti didn't miss its chance. What happened was, in 1804, they fought the French, got them off the island. The French were sitting on boats waiting to attack and take the island again. And the Haitians just weren't having it. And in fact, what happened was that the French that were left on the island, because they kept, there was this constant threat that they were going to be re-enslaved. What they did was they killed all the French that were left on the island, because they were terrified that they were going to be enslaved again. And so now you have all the French on, offshore on the boats, and they kept fighting them, and eventually they figured out they weren't going to win, so they went back to France, came back 21 years later to take over the island again. And how the Haitians kept them from taking the island again was by paying reparations. And the reparations were supposed to be until 1945 or something like that. But it was a less, I think 2005 was that big earthquake. And the whole world finds out that all these years, since 1825, almost 200 years, Haiti has been paying reparations to France for freeing themselves, for taking their freedom from slavery. So, yeah, we do know how to do reparations. The one thing we know is that we do know how to do reparations. We know how to do reparations. We just are really conscious.
One way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because a lot of Americans don't know that after the civil rights, the Civil War, a lot of the planters sued the U.S. government for loss of labor and loss of property, and they were paid reparations. And in some places, like $300 per enslaved person that they set free. So they were paid reparations. The ones who were supposed to receive reparations, remember 40 acres and a mule, most of them did not receive that. The few that actually did, by the early 1900s, a lot of those people were millionaires, the first Black millionaires in this country. So, so a lot of history that we don't know. And I always remind people, you need your history to heal, because that's why the doctor asks you to write down all your history so they can figure out how to heal you. So, thanks for asking. Questions, comments of the stuff that we've seen, the stuff we've been talking about. How are you feeling? Where are you feeling it in your body? Just take a nice deep breath and blow it out. And let yourself be present and talk to me. What's happening? What's happening inside of you? How's this stuff landing?
Sad.
Yeah. Hi, Jen.
Hi. For me, I think it's the place of disbelief sometimes that humans can be so so unkind to each other and cut themselves off from connecting, like it's kind of perplexing. I guess that's the emotion I'm feeling now, is that like just being perplexed. It's like, God, we're such strange creatures to be able to be so cruel to other humans. Is really heartbreaking. And then at the same time, like the capacity we have for connection and care is so great. Again, I guess I'm feeling all the range of emotions today with all these topics, but that's where I am. It's just still, it kind of is mind blowing, but I think it really is about that cutting off that the heart or the human nature from other people. I don't know how else we can continue this on after, centuries and centuries and centuries without being disconnected, that there doesn't seem to be any other explanation for it, that if we really could connect to one another, things would change more rapidly. And maybe that's completely naive. Maybe it wouldn't change if we had that connection, but those are the pieces going through me right now.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. The whole connection piece, huh? Yeah. That's huge, because you have to be able to disconnect from people to be able to do that. Dots, and then we have a goddess on, and I can't see your name. So Dots, you have to unmute that. Okay.
Yes, thanks. I guess I find myself, with many of the same feelings that Melon and Jen and others have talked about, not certainly the full panoply, a lot of sadness. And I guess I'm wondering about going from history to healing. And about what I, as an individual in community and on my own, can do. Certainly I can educate myself. But, you speak lovely words, and this isn't intended to be critical, it's intended to be factual, about creative, innovative solutions and all that. But where are they? When are they coming? What can I do? So that's where I am at the moment.
Thanks, Dot. And the solutions aren't coming. They're not coming. They need to come from us, right? Like, we are the ones. We are the solution. And we are the solution makers. And we are the ones that can change this. Like, we have the power to do that. But it takes waking up to the reality of what is, right? And then allowing yourself to take risks, because that's, you can't do this work without taking risks. Dr. Martin Luther King took risks. John Lewis took risks. That is what the work is. I always tell people it's about growing a spiritual spine. Like, we just have got to get our act together and we can figure this out. This is not something that we can't do. This is something we can do, and we can do it together. But people need education. They need a willingness to take risks, and they need to be able to really start imagining, what does the world look like when we act like a family that loves and cares for one another, when we are being that one human family? What does it look like, right? So we have, thanks, Dot. We have Leora and then Megan.
Hi there. Hi, Milagros. My question is, I was so, I know a little bit about how religion was used to instill slavery, but I had no idea about the document with the Vatican, and that is still what is causing so much, I think, oppression and pain, because that's what comes from oppression in the world today. And I'm kind of surprised that more people aren't talking about it. That was the initial feeling, wow, I've never heard about this before, and I haven't. I follow a lot of people who are race experts, so this was so new and insightful. So I want to say thank you for that. It always, learning about race, learning about history, and slavery, it always brings up, anger and grief in the body. So I'm thankful that you are reminding us to just breathe. And I'm just going to say, what I'm taking from some of this is doing more research on that document and sharing it more myself in my own community to get the word out. So I really appreciate you creating these classes, Milagros. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Yeah. For those of you who are interested in going deeper, I have a 2-day intensive that's really powerful. It really helps people to transform very quickly. It walks people through the layers of the healing process, and it gives them information that really leads to transformation. Remember, I said earlier that my calling is healing racism, but my passion is transformation. That it's, we we need to get our strength, right? And recall who we are. Just really be in the presence of who we truly, truly are as human beings, so that we can really transform this stuff, because we can. But people need to be educated, and they need information that will allow them to think creatively about what we can do. So yeah, thank you so much. There, I think, Joseph, if you don't mind putting in the chat the link to the 2-day program that's coming up. It's intense, it's life transforming. People just never see race the same way again. They just don't. This is the 20th year of my doing that program. And everybody that's been through it, regardless, and I've had KKK members go through it and neo-Nazis go through it. It's a powerful, powerful, transformative program that continues to evolve as I learn more and I do more of my own healing work. So yeah, I think I also have I have a program on money coming up, race and money, which is going to be really interesting for those of you who are interested in the financial side of this. So yeah, thank you. Megan.
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
I've done enough of your trainings, Milagros, to know I usually go for a walk when I'm listening so I can stay in my body. So I'm breathing. Yeah. I'm feeling frustration. I'm feeling shakiness. I'm feeling agitation. And I'm feeling like a great gratitude and almost awe of how you teach in the way that you do, in such a grounded way. And I know you've been doing this for so long, and how you're just such a steady force. You know, it really is awe-inspiring. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Here's one of the things that I'm wanting to say. I think when I'm hearing comments of the sort of theme of what can we do and why isn't anyone doing something, or things like that, it's, yeah, and just underlining your statement, like it's on us. And I'm thinking of how, like, when Columbus landed in the current Dominican Republic, they weren't seeing them as humans because they didn't see them as humans. It's like, why can't we just connect as humans? Well, they didn't see them as humans. And I'm thinking of the ways in which, in that video too, that narrative is still being perpetuated, right? Like, these Black men are not human.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of our work, whether it, might be conscious, it might not be conscious, but that system wants to maintain its power. And as you said, if it keeps us traumatized, if it keeps us not seeing each other as human, then the perpetration can continue. Yeah. So I was just seeing that parallel of how people of color are just constantly being portrayed as less than, as not human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Not fully, wholly human, right?
Yeah.
I'm breathing.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep breathing. Yeah. Nice, long, slow, deep breaths. It's, this dysfunction really is perpetuated by constant propaganda. And once you become educated, that's why I do the 2-day program, because people have asked me, well, can you split that program into? It's like, no, I can't. Because what happens is when you give yourself a break, the brain fills in the blank, and you're going to fill it with a lot of the misinformation, because that's all you have. You fill it with what you got, right? So that's why I do that over 2 days, because it's like you need to be in it. You need mind, body, spirit, and emotions to be in it. and then walk through the healing process on the second day, because it's you need to be able to absorb the information, and also you need to know that you're going to be all right. Especially people who feel fragile around this stuff, you're going to be all right. Because a lot of what's happened with this stuff, and particularly for white people, is you've been trained through the propaganda that you're not strong enough to hold the information. You're fragile. That's not true. That's not true. It's difficult information, but you are enough to hold it. You are enough to hold that information. And you need to be able to hold that information so that you know that you have the strength and the power to transform it. And behind all of that propaganda and all that stuff, right, is the truth of who you are as a human being, which is extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. That's why you have to be convinced that you're not enough. Because when you are in your power, you are extraordinary. And you can change anything. And collectively, we are a much bigger force than we ever could be all by ourselves. Collectively, we can make changes happen. But we have to learn to be compassionate with one another and patient with one another, because people don't know what they don't know. And if we attack people for not knowing, we're just as bad as the dysfunction. Does that make sense? We cannot attack people for not knowing. There are a lot of people who don't know what they don't know. So just being conscious and knowing how you choose to walk that path makes a big difference. Makes a big difference. Willie, you've been waiting patiently, and then Ames.
Okay, so I've been sitting here and I'm like sweating. I'm having like heat strokes. I'm like going through all type of emotions because it's just surprising to me that there's so many people that don't know. I was one, let's say 10 years ago, I was as ignorant as can be, sitting back watching my mother, my father, my family members all fight through the civil rights movement, and just never really took the time out to say, what's really going on? Why are they fighting? And then it hit me right before, let's say 10 years ago. And for me, how I really, really witness it is I race motorcycles. I'm in a sport where it's pretty much dominated by white men. 98% of everyone that races motorcycles are white men. The moment I stepped outside of myself and started really posting about different injustices and different, racial systems that keep plaguing us over and over and over again, I became the target now at the racetrack, where no one wants to talk to me. No one wants to come around me. I'm labeled as the worst guy that could possibly be at the racetrack. And I tell people, why am I the worst guy when I speak the truth? When I tell you what's going on in my community, and this is not something that we wake up to be demons every day. We don't wake up to be demonized every single day, but we have to deal with what's been put on us by society every single day. And the moment we step up and try to fight it, we become the target. So I ask people over and over again, why are we targeted as the demons, as the problem, when we're only trying to expose the problems that's been plaguing our communities for centuries? Something as simple as the educational system. Why do I have to move into West Bloomfield, Michigan for my child to get a great education versus living in Detroit and getting the poorest education known to man and expecting to survive with that? It's physically impossible for that to happen. I mean, you might have one out of every million that squeezed through the cracks to make it. But what about the other 999,000 that's not going to make it? So when I sit back and I listen to everyone in this Zoom meeting, my question to everyone is, once it's over with, how many of us is really going to take the time out to research these racist systems that's plaguing us and helping others move forward, because that's what it's really all about. It's about keeping the ball and chain on a selective group of people while other people prosper from it. So that's my question to the people that's in here. How many are really going to take the time out to educate themselves on these racist systems or white supremacy systems that's constantly right in front of our faces, but as long as it's not affecting you, you will constantly ignore it. So that's my question to everyone that's listening.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I want you to sit with that question because it's a great question that Willie just asked. And we can swing around again. Ames, I want to give you an opportunity. Good to see you, Ames.
So nice to see you. So nice to be here. I was actually thinking, I've been thinking so many things and want to say so many things, but coming off of what Willie just said, I think a lot about that. How can we maintain and sustain doing this work, which is, involves a lot of trauma, involves a lot of investigating, and often brings up a lot of our own trauma. And, when we were hearing the reactions of the people who saw the video, and I'm sorry I was late, I didn't see the first few minutes of the video. Was that the 13th?
Yeah, it was clips
okay, yeah.
on the 13th. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I watched that last year. So just a little bit of history. I was with Milagros last year when she started her Lunch and Learns, and we did this for months and months and months, and it was after the murder of George Floyd, and I knew nothing. And then I slowly, through like the loving teaching of Milagros, learned so much, but it was so traumatizing because I was so ignorant, and that was deeply embarrassing. I felt an enormous amount of guilt and embarrassment and humiliation, and also too bad. Like I was still willing to do it, like, and show up. And I think Milagros being such a loving presence and like anything that anybody says is not going to fluster her because she's already heard it a million times and understands where it's coming from. So I want to get back to what Willie said in a minute, but I also am thinking about one of the women who talked about having a lot of guilt. And I was hearing that because I was watching the video and noticing how much, what I really felt at the video was like powerlessness and like overwhelm at systems that are this huge and this big, and like, how can I help? So I feel overwhelmed still, but I don't feel guilt anymore. And one of the reasons why I want to talk about this is because I think if you stay long enough and you keep doing your work and you keep learning, you can heal this component and you don't feel the guilt anymore. It didn't happen fast for me, but like now there's an acceptance. I kind of had to grow up. I had to grow up and realize that this society and the country that I thought I was living in is not the country that I was living in. And the reality that I'm living in and what other people are experiencing, I did not know. And now I'm learning, and I'm so grateful for that. So I have to do a lot of my own trauma work. That's why Milagros talks about breathing and healing and staying in the moment, because otherwise, and I think this gets back to what Willie is saying, is that as I was listening, I was like, what is happening here? Like, what are the options when people hear about work and systems that are this oppressive and violent? It's like, well, we ignore, which Milagros said, right? Like, so we're innocent before we know. If we don't know, we're like innocent. And then once we know, we have to do the work of ignoring. And Margaret Atwood has a great quote about that. So we ignore, right? Because it's like just too overwhelming. I just can't deal with it. I have to do my own stuff. Or we have to do a lot of work to keep ourselves well. Like our own self-wellness is so required to keep doing this because it's so important. So I guess it's kind of like a heal thyself thing, but it's deep, man. Like this is like, if you want to stay and do this fight, and then like the overwhelm of like, how do we change these systems? And Milagros says, and this is, you said all this stuff last year, right? And then like it sinks in and it hits on deeper levels. It goes from my head to my heart. Yeah. You said like, this is an individual thing. This is your journey. You got to do it. Like we are not going to elect the right person who's going to change everything. It's not going to happen. we can practice compassion and love and learn and go into our communities. And that has a ripple effect that is really big. And so, like, I am willing to do that. I want to do that. And it can seem like, well, but I want to go and like change the whole prison system, but I can't change the whole prison system, but I can change my heart and my mind and keep learning and listen to and be willing. Like when Willie talks, I'm listening, I'm hearing, I'm not saying like, oh, I don't want to hear that. Or like the men that he's experiencing at the racetrack who don't want to hear him because they're too threatened or whatever. Or they didn't do the work to feel like they can listen to what he's experiencing. So I think that that's just a really important thing to realize, that all these little steps add up to a big, big change. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And indeed, a lot of what people can do is to join groups that are doing some of these things, and also being conscious about the groups that you join, if that's the direction you want to go in, because there's a lot of righteous indignation, right? And then there's a lot of anger, and being conscious of what does that mean and how does that play? Because I want to take a moment. I'm going to call on you next, Lynn, but I want to take a moment to talk about that and just kind of peel that back a little bit. The anger piece. Anger is part of the healing process, and anger happens when we have been deceived or oppressed or victimized, whatever it is, right? Like there's nothing wrong with anger. It's how we use it, right? And what we do with it that makes a difference. Anger is a place that human beings are wired to visit, but we're not wired to live there. Does that make sense? Okay. It's an emotion that we are wired to visit because it's as a reaction to something, right? But human beings are not wired to live there. Remember, I'm always talking about how the body makes a chemistry for everything, right? And it makes a chemistry for anger. And so we're not wired to live that way. We are actually wired for bliss and for peace and all those kinds of things. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because we have a lot of groups and communities and people who are righteously angry. The thing is that when we choose to live there, let me back up. Let me explain it from the perspective of frequency, because that's more how I understand it, right? Like everything's a frequency. Our thoughts are we put out an electromagnetic field with our thoughts, their frequency, and they can be measured. They've been measured all the time. You can look that up on the web. I love the web now, because when I started doing this work, we didn't have that, and it was people had to go to the library, look it up in a book, right? So there is a frequency to everything, and the body feels it, right? If you choose to live in the realm of anger, and I'm not saying you shouldn't get angry, because anger is part of the healing process, an important part of the healing process, and it needs to be recognized, and it needs to be acknowledged, and then we have to work through it, right? But it's really important to be conscious as we start to heal that everything adds to the external frequency. By that, I mean, if you go out and you join anger, you're adding to the frequency that's causing the dysfunction. Does that make sense? So you have to, as you start to heal, you have to be conscious of the energy that you carry, not only because it's important to the world, but it's also important to you and your body. So let's do a little exercise, and then I'm going to call on Lynn. Actually, let me call on Lynn, and then we'll do a little exercise, and then we'll do our meditation. So go for it, Lynn. Thank you, Willie.
And my comment and question probably could be handled at a different time when we have more time, but let me just tell you what it is, and then you can decide when we should talk about it. in addition to the guilt that I talked about before, I have a terrible sense of fear when I look around what's going on in almost every state now with voter suppression. And I think this is the modern day version of what you showed us in that film about jailing. And I almost can't believe it. And I'm wondering, how does a person of color look at what's happening here and still have any sense of hope that we can make things better? That's my fear, and I'm sure that's a half-hour conversation, but I just wanted to put it out there because it's in my face every day.
Mhm.
And it's terrifying to me that it's so pronounced, and it's almost in every state in this country. And if I were a person of color, I would just have enormous feelings. I do, as a Caucasian person, have a feeling of fear. And you know, how can you not just hate these people that are trying to do this? So that's a complicated question, but that's what I just wanted to put out there that I'm dealing with.
Yeah. And it's real. I mean, that's real. There's a lot of anger on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people who are doing it because they're angry.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they're doing is angering the rest of us, you know, and so everybody's angry. But do you see that? Like, you know, and then that becomes part of because that is part of the disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I take people through the layers of the healing process, it's like anger is right up at the top, right beneath denial.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's, you know, so then what do you do with that? What do you do with that anger? And being conscious of how that anger not only affects you as an individual, but affects the world that we live in. And understanding that is really important. So we put out this electromagnetic field that affects everything around us. You ever walk into a space and it's like you feel so peaceful? And have you ever walked into a space where you just like, you could feel the anger in that space? There's nobody there, you know, but maybe two people were arguing 2 hours ago. And the energy sits there and it stays there. And that energy then begins to affect the people around you, right? So, see, healing takes a lot of courage. And here's why. Because sometimes healing is antithetical to the stuff that you think you should be doing. Like, you know, well, they're out there, you know, beating with bricks, right? And that's why the civil rights movement was virtually a peace movement. It was a peaceful movement, but it was based on the energy of peace. There was a reason for that. That didn't stop those other people from attacking, and the dogs and the hoses and everything else. But eventually they did prevail. Because the thing about anger, energy, let's look at it from the micro to the macro, right? So anger energy can only, like, you literally have to sustain anger energy after a while by, you have to do certain things to maintain that, okay? Because the natural default of your body and your humanity is to go back to some sense of normalcy. And so you have to like tell the story to yourself over and over and over again to maintain the anger. And sometimes the story takes over and it starts to play in your head over and over and over again, and that maintains the anger. But what I want you to know is that your body is reacting to it. Not only is your body reacting to it, but you're putting out an electromagnetic field that then affects everyone and everything around you. But the same is true if it's opposite, right? So I want you to take a nice deep breath and put down whatever you have in your hands and just kind of close your eyes for a minute and simply say to yourself silently, don't make any sound, just say to yourself, I want you to, before you say anything to yourself, I just want you to notice your body and how it's feeling, and bring the awareness to the inside of your body, and see if you can just almost tell the way your heart is beating, and just be aware of the inside of your body. And just simply say to yourself the word anger. 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 and notice your body. Take a nice deep breath, blow it out, and simply say to yourself, peace, peace, peace. Nice deep breath, blow it out, open your eyes, and could you feel the difference? That's what you're putting out there, one or the other. It isn't just because, how did it affect your body? Those of you who could feel the difference, how did it affect your body? You can just raise your hand or shout out. Willie, your hand's still up. I don't know if you wanted to say something.
I don't know how to get it down.
Oh, okay, that's all right. Did you want to say, could you feel the difference between anger and peace?
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel the difference between anger and peace every single day.
Every day.
You know.
Yeah.
So I try to suppress my emotions, dealing with a lot of different things. Things that I see online, things that I see right in my communities, things that I see with my own family members every single day. And it creates anger. It creates a lot of emotions. So,
yeah.
You know, it's just something that you just so used to dealing with. It's normal to you now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, when the dysfunction becomes normal, it's normal. Yes. We call it normalizing dysfunction, right?
Right.
So, but here's the thing. You have the power to shift from anger to peace, just like that. You just did it. And choosing the state of consciousness you're going to live in the moment, because in this moment, you're not engaged in a battle. There's nobody, you know, I'm not arguing with you. I'm not fighting anybody here, you know, so you're not even engaged, but your body reacted, right? Like how many of you felt like it almost felt like your blood pressure went up, but your heart was beating faster? Just wave if that's what happened. Yeah.
And you made a statement that really resonated with me when you said anger is a place to visit. It's not a place to live. Yeah. And when I see so many people just walking around filled with anger and rage, you know, sometimes I tell them myself, you know, you have to change your train of thought and all those emotions that's got you stuck in that rage mode, in that anger mode. You can't accomplish anything by being in that. You have to come out of that. Yeah. So you can redirect your focus on change.
Absolutely. And the thing is that you don't have access to as much of yourself when you're in anger mode as you do when you're in calm and peace.
Yes,
that's why it's important. And you have the ability to shift your consciousness. But what I want to say about that is being conscious of what you're joining. Okay, that's really important. And if you feel like, oh, well, okay, there's nothing out there that has the level of peace that I want to come at this with, because let me say something about that. That all of that stuff functions and feeds off of the energy of anger and hatred, and all, we see it all the time, right? So if we're going to be hateful toward them and angry and, you know, like we are just joining their frequency, and the level of impact that we could actually have gets diminished. Does that make sense? And we can't even think straight because we don't have access to the totality of ourselves when we are in that state of consciousness. So that's why I had you go into that state of consciousness. You see your heart goes up and you almost feel like you want to fight, flight, or you feel paralyzed, like you can't do anything. So just being aware of that, because it could be that you're the one that has to start the group, right? And then you set the energy for that group, because you want to make a difference in the world, and you make a difference in the world by being different, not by being the same as the dysfunction that you're trying to heal. And I know that sometimes that feels antithetical to people. It's like, well, they're throwing rocks, well, we got to throw rocks too. Well, you know what? Dr. King didn't do that. He did it differently. Those who have been really successful, Mahatma Gandhi didn't do that. They did it differently. We have been given a template that we can follow, but it takes practice, right? And a willingness to do things differently. So I wanted to take a deep breath because, you know, you guys know I always run over, right? 2 minutes, we're going to do a short meditation. Just take a nice deep breath And close your eyes and just relax for a minute. And again, become aware of your body and bring in that sense of peace, because peace isn't something that you have to go get somewhere else. Peace lives within you. It's one of the gifts that was given to you to come with on this planet. It lives within you and you have access to it 24/7. So just let yourself be conscious of peace and take a nice deep breath and breathe in that peace. And in honor of our ancestors, I offer this prayer. Brinuya halom gidi sumbeyayaungni bringi oli hiramnayai sammeregem yaitiri itung iyairam andiram himbai. So it is. Take a nice deep breath. And we send peace to all those who have come before us, those who are here now, and those who are yet to come. May we always know that we are enough, and we are enough to change that which needs to be changed. Thank you all so much for being here today. Happy Juneteenth to all of you, and many blessings. Thank you. Have an amazing week.
Thank you.
You can open up your mics and say bye to everybody.
Thank you, Milagros. Love you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Ready.
Thanks everyone for sharing. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Happy Juneteenth.
Blessings.
Thank you for
Bye,
bringing
Milagros.
the energy we need, Milagros. Thank you.
Thank you,
Oh,
Milagros.
thanks, Lori.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so
Amazing.
much.
You
Milagros.
were amazing.
Willie, take good care.
Wonderful.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Milagros.
Bye. Have a
Bye-bye.
great week.
You too.